Welcome to the apex of sports ownership, the Apex Athletic Collective.
Welcome everyone to episode 38 of Instigate Success, Building an ABA Franchise. I am your host, Jake Schoen. I'll be here for tonight's episode. 38 episodes already. Again, I'm always surprised to see how many we have out, but we'll still be putting them out every Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern. And I'll be hosting that throughout the whole off season, as well as once we get back into our season. Again, no votes like currently up. We're still working on some stuff for the off season, a couple of things to get figured out before we actually put anything up there. But we'll have some stuff throughout the off season. Still is a pretty long off season for the ABA until we hit the regular season again. But we do have some stuff we're working on throughout, and we'll eventually get some votes in for all of our fan voters. I figured I'd start off this episode and address my recent comments and that I made this week. I think that everybody probably knows that I was involved with the FCF since season 1, and this past week that I made an announcement that I'm no longer going to be actively participating as a fan within the FCSE environment. So I'll just address that a little bit. I'm not going to go super deep into it. I did make a video about it, but just to clarify a couple of things. So the decision, I pretty much made the decision beforehand. Had Yuli won the vote, I would stay. If Yuli lost the vote, I was going to leave. Even if the vote was fair, I mean, that's kind of a moot point. I don't, I didn't really agree with how the vote was carried out. But that's regardless. I think I probably would have left even if it was truly an equal vote. I think my issue was with the vote that Massey was on the left side, which we've seen has won pretty much every time since the app has been updated for a much longer time. And when I say time, not number of voting times, I mean like actual time. And that happened over a holiday weekend. And then the last day, they kind of tried to make up for it and put Yealy in multiple times in the vote. But again, like I said, even if that would have been a fair vote, if Yealy lost that, I think I still would have left. But that's not to discourage anybody from participating within the FCSE. That's not my point. My point by doing this was actually to kind of like help them, I guess, and hopefully they can get their issues fixed. That way, I know AJ King Ka, he also followed me when I announced that I was leaving. But my hope was that with a couple of people leaving, that it kind of kicks it in the right gear. They realize like they've actually got to get things fixed and figured out before they do important votes. And I'm a lifelong Yealy fan, so if I go back, Yealy's going to have my vote over FCSE every time. So that's basically where it fell. With him losing that vote, I just couldn't see to take the time out of my day every day to stay with the voting. But again, that's not to say that anybody should not be involved with that. Actually, if they get everything fixed and, if Yealy were to come back and be in another vote, I'd jump in and vote for him again. Or if for somehow football comes back, basketball, whatever, and they get back into the season, I'll consider coming back for that as well. So I wouldn't say it's 100% permanent that I'll never be back, but I did just want to address that a little bit. And I think that the other thing was, if you follow JJ Yealy like I do on social media, you saw that this vote was actually very important to him. And he was making posts like every day, sometimes multiple times per day. And he's actually really involved with the FCSE world. So like he was in the app. He's been in the FCSE Discord. I'm not super familiar with Mason Massey, so I'm not going to say anything against him personally. But I do know firsthand that Yealy is very involved And he actually was really excited for this opportunity and was hoping to take full advantage of that. But that didn't work out in his favor. So unfortunately, that's not something he's going to be looking forward to. And being a NASCAR fan, it hurt me a lot because if you look at the four options that we had, the first vote was between Massey, who won that vote, and then the second vote. And it was Massey, who's a full-time truck series driver, so he has a full-time ride. Chad Fincham, he's a part-time driver. He typically drives for lower tier teams, and I think he actually brings his own ride a lot of times. And then Gray Galding, who actually just got arrested this week and is suspended indefinitely from NASCAR, so he would have never even been able to run that race. So throw that vote out. So basically, in the first one, it was between Massey and Fincham. And then having Yealy in that vote, Yealy is also a part-time driver. He basically runs when he can get sponsors. So this was a huge hit to him on that side as well, because he's missing out on a potential sponsorship. So I mean, that being a Yealy fan, that hit a little hard. But again, that's nothing to say that you can't be still involved with them. Again, I'd love for them to get it fixed and potentially join again. But until then, I'm stepping away. I've got other things I can focus my time on, and I guess I'll still shout it out. So, I mean, with that vote, Mason Massey is going to be running the number 14 fan-controlled car on the 420 race at Talladega. I've been away from the app, but I did hear through the grapevine that they're doing a thing. Again, I don't know all the details, but it sounds very similar, honestly, to the show that I got approved when I pitched it on Pitch Room. So it sounds like they're doing a thing where you can enter a contest to win an RV ride. So you'll meet them at their headquarters or something, and then they'll ride an RV, and you'll be at the event for that race on 420 at Talladega. So I mean, if you still want a chance to go out to that race, that's a cool opportunity. But like I said, that is very similar actually to the show that I pitched a few years back. It was, I think we were going to call it Family Tree or Family Road Trip. We were going back and forth between those two names, but I pitched a show basically where, like, Pit My Ride-esque was what I called it. So you submit a fan, fans would submit videos, and then we'd have weekly votes throughout the season. This was back in season 2. This is when I pitched it. And we would select one fan each week, and I would kind of just drive around the country or fly, depending on the length of distance between the headquarters and where the fan lived. And then basically we would get to know the fan. They would do a whole pitch, and then we would go back to the headquarters in Atlanta and have a VIP experience and kind of just show off everything around there. But from what I've heard, that sounds very similar to the contest that they're going to be doing. So I, that's surprising, but I guess it's cool that it's actually coming to life, even if I'm not involved with it. But anyways, we'll jump into the ABA news. Enough of addressing that, I guess. But I'll still be around here. I'm definitely still involved with the AAC, the Instigators, everything with that. That has no impact at all, my announcement with the FCSE. But again, we'll jump into ABA news. So all of you guys here, again, thank you for joining us. We'll jump into that and get you caught up. A lot of it's going to be some review from last week, because there were not many games played this past weekend as far as the ABA playoffs go, but still a couple more games to fill out the rest of the bracket and eventually get us our final four for all of the champions to face off in Alabama. And that championship's actually going to be the weekend of the 19th and 20th, so same weekend as that race for FCSE. But we saw this a few weeks ago, actually. The Lions hosted the Central Region Championship game. And they had the semifinals where the Lions were able to knock off the Pitbulls and the Fury took down the Buckets, which led to the championship game in the Central region, the region which the Hoosier State Instigators are located in. That game between the Fury and the Lions was pretty much a blowout. So I did catch that game on YouTube when that was happening. And really, the Fury kind of just got out in front, and there was never really any coming back for the Lions. They cut the lead a little bit, but they were significantly down throughout that game, and just too big of a deficit for them to overcome. And the Chicago Fury are the current Central Region champions for the ABA. So they'll be representing our region when they make the trip out to Alabama at the ABA championship. So I think I'll be rooting for them because obviously, we've got the ties in the Central region. So, it's unfortunate the Lions lost, but if you watch the game, the Fury definitely deserved that win. They from the tip just were able to get out ahead and hold on to that game. But you know, now we're not going to be able to use the defending champion or co-champion Lions in our promos for next year. But I guess that means that our division is up for grabs next year as well. So there's a positive to that as well. But the Fury are going to represent the Central region, and I look forward to seeing what they're able to do once they come down to Alabama for the actual championship weekend. Again, that was back on March 24th, so been a couple of weeks. They still have a couple more weeks of rest actually before they get back into the ABA playoffs. There was a game played this past weekend, so here is the game that decided the West Region Championship. And they didn't have like a super cool graphic like last time. The last time for the actual game, they had like this really intricate, detailed design, but this one's kind of more simple. But the Silicon Valley Panthers were able to defeat the New Mexico Bull Snakes by a pretty significant margin as well. That was this past weekend. So the Panthers are going to be representing the West region. And actually, that's a pretty long travel now that I think about it, from Silicon Valley all the way to Alabama. That is going to be a very long trip for the Panthers, but they will be representing the West. They'll have a lot to play for in the championship as well. Again, a lot of these teams I'm not super familiar with as far as any kind of film and stuff on them. I haven't really watched much games outside of the Central region, but I have followed like just the box scores to keep up and see who is in the playoffs still. But the Panthers had the more impressive record on the season, and I believe they would have been the favorites if there was any kind of line going into this game. So I think the Panthers held up what was expected in the Western region. And there was another game played. This is in the East region, though. And the East region's a little bit different, so I'll explain that a little bit more detail after this. But the Binghamton Bulldogs took down the Wyoming Valley Clutch in a pretty close game compared to the other two games that we have seen for the final scores in the conference championships, I guess you could call them. But the Binghamton Bulldogs 13-point victory over the Clutch. And this one's got the graphic from their record according to the ABA stats site. So you can see there they both have pretty impressive and similar records. The Bulldogs have more victories on the season, but also a couple more losses because they played a couple more games. But I do know, I haven't watched them live, but I have seen some of their clips. They're a pretty impressive team. They were able to take down Buffalo Extreme. That's one of the other teams out in the East region that's been pretty highly ranked throughout the power rankings. And I did follow them throughout the season because they had Howard Washington as one of their guards. and he was on Syracuse while I was attending Syracuse. We were both in the same year, so I saw him like during his it was like the orange versus white game or whatever they call it, like the scrimmages and stuff, freshman year. So it was one of the players I followed him as well as like O'Shea Brissett. He's actually in the NBA. Were some of my favorite guys to watch at Syracuse during that year. But Howard Washington, he is on the Buffalo team. So when I saw Binghamton match up against Buffalo and they were able to get a couple of victories throughout the season as well as in the playoffs against Buffalo, I knew Binghamton was going to be a team to watch in the playoffs. So the East region is a little bit different, like I was saying. So that win there does not lock them into the final championship round in Alabama. The East has decided to continue their series a little bit longer than the rest of the regions. And this is actually, with that victory this past weekend, moves them on to the Elite Eight. So there's still another game that has yet to be played in the East region. And that is the Providence Pirates versus the Thunder. And that is actually tomorrow. So tomorrow night, that is going to be deciding the other team that has a chance to represent the East. And I believe it's Cody Island Thunder. It's drawn a blank in the graphics a little small, but I believe it's the Coney Island Thunder. And that is going to be another good game. But whoever wins that game is going up against the Binghamton Bulldogs. So there's still a couple more games to be played. The bracket has not been completely filled out yet for the ABA playoffs. Still, more games to be played. We'll keep you guys updated on that next week. And actually, that's going to be the last week before, well, I guess not technically. So it'll be the last week before they actually jump into the playoffs. The playoffs start on the 19th. So I'm not 100% sure what the time will be on the game on the 19th, but we'll be, I believe we should have a show here. The 19th is, Friday. So we'll actually be live here on the 19th. So we'll have to see if maybe that game is live at the same time, or if they already played it, we'll recap that as well. But next week is the last week. I know for sure we'll have a preview at the ABA playoffs and the bracket. But again, tomorrow they still have another game to play between the Pirates and the Thunder. And the Bulldogs explained this a little bit on their Facebook as far as what the scenarios would be. So if they, depending on the winner of the game, they would play on Sunday, either tomorrow or Sunday next week. So there's still a little bit of a scenario where we could actually be looking at an unfilled bracket next weekend as well. But if the Pirates win, and the Pirates have the better record, but they did play less games, they would play against each other on Sunday, so the following day after the Providence and Coney Island game. And that would be the deciding factor for who makes it to the East. However, if Coney Island wins, then the Binghamton Bulldogs will have to wait another week, and they will play Coney Island the following week. And I think that the reasoning behind that is the location. So instead of it being a centralized location, how we had it set up in the central region, it actually is going by the records as far as I I think that's how it goes in there. And they actually honor the home court for the higher records. The Lions, I guess, actually did have the best record aside from the Kings. Again, I'm not 100% sure how the tiebreakers wound up playing out because the Kings had less games than 16, even though they were undefeated on the season. So I think they still wound up with the number one seed. But all the games were played at Danville, which was the home of the Lions. So the East a little bit different. If Providence wins, they have the better record. They'll be hosting. And if Coney Island wins, Binghamton will actually host because they have the better record. So that's the difference between where the games will be played, because Providence is where the game tomorrow is being played. So less travel for the team that has less rest, if that is the case for tomorrow's game. And if it is the following weekend, then it gives both teams a little bit of time, because the travel from Providence to Binghamton is pretty significant. I lived in upstate New York when I attended Syracuse, so I actually lived in Syracuse. So I'm familiar with the surrounding area. So from Binghamton to Providence or vice versa is a bit of a drive, and that's a lot to expect in a 1 day turnaround, especially after a game. So it makes plenty of sense that they would choose to do that. So the East will keep you updated, but that is the only region that we have left to be filled. And the South, very similar setup to the Central region. They had everything figured out pretty much the same time that we did. And the Mississippi Silverbacks, again, I'm reusing their graphic from last week, were the South champions. So they are representing the South. And again, they're going to have a little bit of the home court advantage as far as geography goes. Um, and that is the 19th and the 20th. Those are the final four teams, and we'll have the semifinals and then the final game at the championship. But that'll be a fun event. Definitely looking forward to that. And again, I'd like to say that the Central can hopefully pull out that win and still remain the champions of the ABA. But whoever wins that, it's a very impressive title. Again, we've mentioned this several times in the past, but there's over 150 teams in the ABA. So whichever team wins it definitely deserves it, because that is impressive to be crowned the champion of 150 plus teams in any professional sport. But again, that is going to be a lot of fun. I don't know who Fly Rich Double is. I think I said that last time as well, but they have him as a special guest, so he might be performing or something. But that'll be fun either way, and a lot on the line for all of these teams as they head into the final round of playoffs for the ABA. So still a couple of more weeks of ABA action before everybody hits off-season mode. But we still got another week to get the East figured out. On that, but we'll definitely share that next week. Mentioned this last week as well. So March Madness still going on. I believe that the women's game is actually on right now, if I'm not mistaken. I think the first game had finished up, but I'll double check that. Yeah, so the first game did finish up, the game NC State against South Carolina for the women's bracket, and South Carolina was able to win that by 19 points. So it looks like they pretty decidedly won that. The other game, which is a lot on the line for a couple of the players there, UConn and Iowa, that starts in a couple of minutes, actually 9:30. And there's probably gonna be some more records broken throughout these women's playoffs. But that LSU and Iowa game, that one I know broke some viewing records as far as women's basketball goes, and it's led to a lot of different media coverage, which is pretty amazing. You know, us being a basketball team at the Instigators, any kind of basketball, you know, is great to watch. So whether it's, you know, women's basketball, men's basketball, the March Madness bracket, NIT, any of that, I always love watching basketball. So any exposure I think is good exposure. But I see we got Jason Wright in our chat here. Yeah, that game, UConn and Iowa, that's going to be a good one. Looks like you got a little bit of insight for us here. So it looks like, oops, I jumped on the wrong one there. NC State looks like they had a bad third quarter, so that might have been the difference in that game. I didn't have a chance to catch it, unfortunately. But yeah, you mentioned Caitlin Clark. She has been the talk throughout the women's bracket, the all-time points leader. Very impressive to watch her play. Some of the shots are just honestly ridiculous that she takes, and I don't, I don't think that I could ever hit those shots. I've never been a three-point shooter, and pulling up from half court is just kind of ridiculous. And yeah, that $5 million offer from the big three, that's a huge thing. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, because if it was me, I would probably take that money and run, and I'd play in the big three for that. Um, but I know the WNBA unfortunately just doesn't have the viewership that some of the March Madness games has had for women's basketball. So it's interesting to see what her decision will be, and I think it honestly will have a pretty big impact in the future of women's basketball, because if we can have kind of a mixed gender basketball league, whether that's the big three or some other professional league that sprouts up following that, that would be really interesting because, like I said, unfortunately, the WNBA just has not had the viewership, and uh, just hasn't seemed to draw as much interest for whatever reason as some of these collegiate women's games has. But I think if she jumps to the big three, there might be some more women's basketball players that follow suit. And the way she plays, I honestly think she can hold up in any league. I know people have thrown out the NBA as well. Um, the NBA, I mean, honestly, I'd be open to it. I don't see any reason why she couldn't play in the NBA. Um, we've got what a bunch of teams. We got teams that really don't win many games. I'll throw the Pistons and the Wizards under the bus there, but when there's teams like that, I don't see why she couldn't play on a roster with all the talent that she has. But I know there's another announcement as well. Bronny, LeBron's son, is potentially entering the draft, and that'll be another person to watch. That'll be interesting to see what their decision is. His collegiate career was not very great as far as the stats go for his time in USC. Um, but it'll be interesting. It's LeBron's kid, so I can't imagine he wouldn't be on a roster in the NBA. But we'll have an interesting matchup for the women's championship. Um, we'll have South Carolina, which I believe was undefeated um, throughout the whole season, against either UConn or um, Iowa. Yeah, so I mentioned Bronny. So he's either entering the transfer portal or the draft. I'm a Syracuse fan, so we have a player on Syracuse that's doing the same thing. I believe it's been unconfirmed. I believe on both of these reports. So it's the way the NBA draft, they changed it a little bit in the recent years, where you can enter the draft or at least put your name into the draft, work out, do some combine work, and then get a pro evaluation, I believe is what they call it. And then after you get that pro evaluation, then you make a decision whether you want to stay in the draft or you can return back to college. And typically, if you're already putting your name into the NBA draft, you don't really have intentions of returning to the same college. So if you return to college, then you have the option to return back to the same college, or you can transfer. But I think that was a newer revision to the draft, and that applies to the NBA. That I don't believe that applies to the WNBA, because of the time frame difference that they have. The WNBA draft's actually pretty fast, coming up after the March Madness, and then the NBA I think has a little bit more time between that. Um, but I know we've had a couple of guys from Syracuse that have tried that out in the past, and if they see their values like a late second round pick, or they might go undrafted, typically they'll come back to college. Um, and if they see their stock go up because of good workouts, then they'll typically jump into the draft. But I think that is what the situation surrounding Bronny is likely going to be. Um, Again, he's LeBron's kid, so I think he's probably going to wind up with a team at some point. As far as the men's side for March Madness, Cinderella story, NC State is still alive and kicking. They get to match up against Purdue. So we'll have DJ Burns, the big man that seems to capture everybody's heart. Uh, he'll be matching up against Zach Edey, who's really big height wise, and that'll be a really interesting matchup. I don't know if those two will actually play head to head against each other because the height difference. I think NC State typically has been using um, a different player for center, and Burns is more of a power forward. So I don't think that's going to be a head to head matchup. But regardless, that'll be a fun game to watch. I've said it throughout the whole tournament. NC State's my favorite team to watch, and really looking forward to seeing what they're able to do. I definitely didn't think they would make it quite this far. Um, my bracket is pretty much completely busted. I think UConn is the only team that I still have left. And congrats there, Jason. I see you still got two teams left. That's more than me. You also got Purdue. I had Purdue getting knocked off a couple of games ago, I think. But I might have been biased after the past couple of years where they fell out early. I think the one time. So Purdue though has been a pretty dominant team as well. UConn has kind of just blown everybody out of the water as far as the men's bracket. So it'll be interesting to see how UConn matches up against Alabama. Alabama is going to be the highest seed that they've faced throughout the tournament so far, but it is definitely going to be interesting. I think UConn's going to win that game. The other one, I mean, if I have to pick a winner, I think I would have to go with Purdue, but I really hope that NC State's able to pull that off. Um, and yeah, it is cool to see that there was both the men's and a women's team for two different universities this year in the Final Four. That's a very impressive feat. UConn, I think we could have seen coming. NC State, I don't think we would have seen coming if you asked anybody before the tournament started, and especially before the ACC tournament. I don't think NC State would have been picked for both of those brackets. That men's team honestly was not the best during the regular season. I think they actually lost a handful of games to end the regular season, and then they haven't lost a game since the ACC tournament. So very impressive run for them. But a lot of games to watch this weekend. So the women's championship will be decided tonight, and then I believe that's played this weekend as well. And then this weekend we've also got the men's games to play out. And so still some more basketball. I don't have a picture here, but I was watching the NIT last night as well, the NIT championship between Indiana State and Seton Hall. And if you watched Indiana State throughout the season, they were actually a ranked team throughout the regular season for NCAA men's basketball. And I thought they would be one of the teams that kind of locked themselves into the March Madness bracket just based off of their regular season resume. But they were like the one team that everybody kind of expected to be in and got left off. Luckily, they accepted the NIT bid. They were a number one seed in the NIT. Seton Hall was also another team that a lot of people thought had a chance to make it into the March Madness bracket. They also were not invited to that bracket, but they got invited to the NIT and took that. Both of them wound up being number one seeds in their respective divisions in the NIT bracket. And that was a really fun game to watch. Indiana State, if you're not familiar with them, the Sycamores, they really haven't been relevant in basketball since Larry Bird played there, and that's quite a while back. But they are located in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is very close to Clinton, Indiana, home of the Hoosier State Instigators. For our inaugural season, we played at the Clinton CRC. And when I drove up from Florida, I drove through Terre Haute, and that was kind of like the last city that I would hit before I got into Clinton. And I didn't really think of anything about it, but once I saw the games, and then I kind of put it together. I was like, oh, that's like literally where I was driving through to get to the games. Um, but Indiana State is very close, so I'm sure some of our Hoosier State Instigators fans made their way out to the Indiana State games throughout the season as well, and definitely we're supporting them in last night's game. Tied at half, back and forth throughout the whole game. Indiana State found themselves up by I think 7 with like 3 minutes to go, give or take on those numbers. But they were up with a few minutes to go in that game, and they just were not able to hit pretty much any shot when it came down to the wire. And unfortunately, their season ended with them losing the lead late to Seton Hall. And Seton Hall had an impressive comeback as well. All credit to them where it's due. Um, but a little bit bittersweet for the Indiana State fans. But that was a fun game to watch. And at the end, Indiana State had some shots where a lot of contact was made. Probably a foul should have been called. They were very physical throughout the game, so I think they let it slide. But there was not just one attempt; it was multiple attempts that there could have been a foul call. Um, but I think if you call it that way throughout the game, I guess that's the way it goes. But I don't think the NCAA does the ref reports that NBA does. So I don't think any ref is going to be coming out and saying that they missed a call. So there's that side as well for those officials. But fun game. If you watched Indiana State throughout the season, they have one player that's been getting a lot of attention throughout a lot of social media. Robert Avila. He's got a bunch of cool nicknames. Anything from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Milk Chamberlain. So he's a fun guy to watch. He's got goggles on and definitely doesn't look like the guy you would expect to be maybe on the basketball court, but he's got some pretty cool moves. And he's a fun guy to watch. So he'll be a guy to keep an eye on throughout the upcoming seasons for Indiana State. I believe he was a sophomore this year, so I think he's planning on returning to Indiana State next year. But he'll be a guy to watch um, following that. But I wouldn't mind if somehow down the road, if he doesn't make it to the NBA or higher leagues, be a fun guy to try to get recruiting to the Instigators. But like I said, he's a sophomore in college, so it's not happening next year. He's got some pretty good NIL deals. I think he even got a deal with the White Sox. So that is more than likely a pretty stable environment that he's got himself in with some sponsors. And I can't say there's any reason I would leave if I were him because of that. But he's definitely gone around on social media for some of his highlight reels, as well as DJ Burns has recently. So those were the two guys that maybe didn't really get a ton of media attention throughout the regular season, but once they hit the postseason, they've been getting some more attention. And I honestly think that's one of the cool things with how college basketball is set up now with NIL. I know a lot of old school coaches have been against it, but I honestly think the NIL deals are some of the coolest things that we've got going for college athletes. With their performances in the playoffs, especially, we've got guys and girls that maybe wouldn't be getting these kind of opportunities had they not performed at such high levels in these potentially go or go home games. We saw that with Oakland when Oakland knocked off Kentucky in the first round. Jack Golke, he's not even like the best player per se on that team, but he hit a bunch of threes. He got super hot in that game, and he found himself with a bunch of NIL deals. And I think he's still running with as many as he can. Um, but I know I've seen him for like some wing place. I think a tax filing agency. But like those are opportunities that in the past would have never happened, and it's a nice way for some of these athletes to take advantage of that. And again, that $5 million offer from the Big Three for Caitlin Clark, I honestly don't think that that happens if there is no NIL, because right now she's on like State Farm ads. She has several sponsorships where she's a pretty popular person as far as media coverage as well, but she's also involved with advertisements. If that was not around, I don't think the that another league would have been offering her 5 million to join that league, and her only option would wind up being the WNBA. But that's just my little take there on the NIL deals. But again, we'll have couple more games here to decide the championship games for both the men's and the women's March Madness brackets. Couple more games for that, and then we'll have the championship. Looking forward to seeing who is crowned the winner. But I think there's definitely the favorites within each of their respective brackets. UConn on the men's side and South Carolina being undefeated, I would have to say is probably the favorite. Though I do know the star power with Caitlin Clark may say otherwise from some people, and they may have Iowa ahead. But either way, fun games to watch. I'll definitely be watching throughout the weekend. And one last thing I had was I mentioned this in the past. So I was involved with a movie throughout this inaugural season for the Instigators, and they actually released a teaser trailer today. They sent it to me. I'm sure they won't mind. I didn't specifically go out and ask them if they would mind, but they put out a public teaser trailer. So I figured I'd show it here on the stream, give you guys a sneak peek. Just a heads up in case anybody does not want to watch it. It is a horror movie, but it's a horror comedy. So it's about pancakes and yeah, basically pancakes that are evil is the easiest way to put it. It's just a minute clip that they put out. So I'll be showing you that here. I just gotta figure out how to get my screen to share, and we'll be doing that. So just about a minute here, teaser trailer. We'll play that. Again, like I said, it is technically a horror comedy. So if that's not something you want to watch, it'll be about a minute or two, and we'll be playing that, and then we'll jump back into conversation here. But here it is.
Order up, almost there. Hey, can customers only. Potato skins. Order's up. Just testing you. I gotcha.
Y'all hear about the waffle emporium that burned down last week? More like a waffle no-morium. It was a massacre. Syrup everywhere. Waffle batter splattered on all the walls. I can still smell the burning waffles now.
So hopefully you enjoyed that. So it was pretty fun to be involved with that. Um, I'm just in the background, so I don't know exactly where or if I'll be in a scene predominantly, but hopefully they got a close up of me because I actually did make a custom Instigators shirt to wear. So hopefully they got a close up because there are some Instigators logos on the shirt that I was wearing. And hopefully we can get the Instigators in there as well. Not sure if they realized that when I was wearing that shirt, but the hint is my nickname is Jakey Muffins, and I'm pretty sure that again, if I'm in a scene there, that Muffin is involved in the scene with me. So that'll be fun to watch, but it's not like a real horror movie. It's more of like a horror comedy movie. But I think they're aiming to get it out for Halloween. I'll keep everyone updated here. As far as if there's any more updates, trailers, anything like that. Um, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. It's the first time I've been involved with any kind of film. I know we had a film star this year with AB in Lady Ballers, so I'm just trying to follow his footsteps. Um, I'm not as predominant in any scene though, and I definitely don't have any lines. I do know that. He did have a couple of lines in his film, so shout out to him for that. But I'm working on it, so hopefully I'll be able to follow in his footsteps one of these days. But yeah, so it's going to be called Haunted House of Pancakes. Again, they're aiming for around October, Halloween type release. But that final scene there, I was actually involved with that shot, and I saw it in person when they were shooting that, and I thought that was a super cool scene when they were shooting it, and to see it on the screen and have it actually look even better than it did in person is pretty cool to see. But that was pretty much my last thing to hit this week. But again, I think if you want, you can follow them on anything. I think they're just Haunted House of Pancakes on any kind of social. But they do post some updates. They had some pretty cool props throughout. A lot of different food props, and the mastermind behind that, he was very impressive. He made a bunch of different food props. Some of them were puppets, some of them actually wound up being like characters. So it was pretty cool. I know he had like little French fries that were actually like attached as puppets, and they like would walk across the countertops. So hopefully that makes it into the movie as well. That was a pretty cool scene that I got to see when they were at the shooting day. But yeah, so I think that was the last thing I had for today's episode of Instigate Success. Um, Again, thank you for joining us for episode 38. We'll keep you updated. And I see there I had a typo. I can't believe I didn't notice it until now. But movie I spelled wrong somehow. It's Movie. Somehow I put Moive. But yeah. Anyways, we'll keep you updated on the ABA playoffs. We'll recap the March Madness tournaments here next week. As always, we'll be back Friday night every week at 9 p.m. Eastern. And until then, as always, be great and instigate.